got an Easter basket again. Probably last one. Next year it'll just be Andy. Oh, it's early. I mean, 2 minutes. Oh, yes. Oh, you don't?
Thank you, choir. Oh my goodness, it is so good to hear you in this room again. I've missed you all. I've missed you all too. Welcome back or welcome again to the Unitarian Church of Los Alamos. I'm the Reverend John Cullinan, your minister here. As Unitarian Universalists, we affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of all people and gather together in a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you are right now at this moment, wherever you are on your life's journey, you are welcome to be a part of this community. I want to extend a special welcome this morning to any visitors or first-time guests we have with us. I'd love to meet you after the service, have a cup of coffee, and answer any questions you might have about our community here. I will, I promise, try to make my way to the grand piano in the fellowship hall and have my coffee there waiting for you. Everyone is welcome to join us for coffee and conversation after the service and for some cake today as we celebrate Marion and Terry Mitchell and their long membership here as we say farewell to them. We will miss you dearly. And now, please center yourself and prepare for worship. Feel the weight of yourself sitting. Feel yourself grounded and connected to the earth. Breathe in. Breathe out. And let us begin. We live inside a paradox. Humans generally don't like to admit it. We much prefer tidy, stable, comprehensible, logical ways of getting through the day. But paradox is woven into the fabric of this particular universe we inhabit. Light is both a particle and a wave. Imaginary numbers describe the math of physical phenomena. Love and grief are inextricably linked, as are rage and sorrow, suffering and compassion, life and death. Time itself is both linear and cyclical. Each person's life traces a single arc, yet patterns emerge and re-emerge. Fear always seems to return. Goodness knows terror finds its way back into the news. We always seem in need of help to roll back big stones that block our way. Yet we also come back to the Alleluia, even if its absence has gone on far longer than the 40 days of Lent. We raise each other's spirits when our sacred places seem empty. We anoint each other. We engage in a demanding faith that asks us to love the next world into being today. We are joyful, though we have considered all the facts. We practice resurrection. It is Easter again, my friends, and you are surrounded by a multitude who wish you well. Come, let us worship together. Please rise in body or spirit and join in our opening hymn, number 270. Please remain standing and join in our affirmation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve life in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony. Thus do we covenant with each and with all. Please be seated. This morning, I am sad to announce the death of Joan Adams. Joan and her husband Tom were longtime members here during the 80s and 90s until the time they moved out to Livermore, California in 1998. And even after they moved, they remained very connected and active with the congregation, still contributing all these years. Joan died on April 4th after long declining health. Her husband was with her, as well as her caregiver. There will be a memorial service for Joan on May 20th at 11 o'clock at the Mount Diablo Unitarian Universalist Church in Walnut Creek, California. I do not know if they are broadcasting that as well as holding it privately yet, but I will get that information to you. For now, as is our tradition, I light the candle of life for Joan Adams. And ask us to share in a moment of silence. Candles have also been lit this morning for Nate Portillos, who is at the UNM hospital recovering from injuries after an accident. In gratitude for the many years Terry and Marion Mitchell have been loving, generous, caring members of our congregation, and for victims of the war in Ukraine. For all our joys, all our sorrows, whether we share them aloud with one another or we hold them quietly and closely to our hearts, let us gather together now in a spirit of prayer and reflection. It seems odd in the present moment to speak of resurrection, insensitive perhaps in the face of such widespread global threats and suffering and death. But this is exactly why we must celebrate the promise of resurrection and the role we play in the endless spirit of unconditional love. Life persists and must at least acknowledge the rising that takes place within our own spirits. We gather together this morning to celebrate a spirit that cannot be destroyed, no matter how many small deaths it suffers. Joy overshadowed by worry, courage overshadowed by fear, charity overshadowed by selfishness, love overshadowed by indifference. Each of these is a death of the spirit. Each of these is an opportunity for resurrection. Eternal and beloved, gracious source of all life and all love, we come together this day in particular grateful for the time out of time which we have set apart so that we might become more fully present to ourselves, to each other, and to that which we call holy. May our hearts be open together. May our spirits be lifted together. May we find in this community the power to rise when we feel tempted to give in and surrender. May we each find a way to be the source of courage and a rising spirit within the life of another. May we renew our commitment to act from a place of love rather than a place of fear. All this we pray in the names of those known and unknown, present and absent, remembered and forgotten, in the names of all the helpers of humankind. Amen. Please remain seated for our meditation hymn, number 1048. Well, folks, how is this for another nice change of pace? If the young and the young at heart would like to join me here at the front of the sanctuary, I have a story this morning. Good morning. It is so good to see you all again right here. So this morning is Easter. And it's an unusual holiday for Unitarian Universalists. It's not one that we typically celebrate across the country. But today I'm going to be talking more about why Easter matters to us, even as Unitarian Universalists. And I thought I would share with you today an easier version of the Easter story, so you know what we're talking about. This is a story in 12 eggs. It's also a nice change of pace that I'm down here and none of you can see what I'm doing. Aren't traditions fun? This is what we know. We know that Jesus was Jewish. And we know that Jesus was a rabbi, a teacher of the faith to people. And what he taught was a radical love. On Palm Sunday, he came into Jerusalem and was greeted by celebration and song, and the people calling him the King of the Jews. And on the Thursday of that week, he celebrated the Passover with his disciples. They had a last meal together. And this is why Christians celebrate the communion even today. He was arrested and bound. And he was executed by the empire on a cross. They buried his body in a cave tomb and rolled a great stone in front of it. And 3 days later, his friends and disciples arrived at the tomb to find that it was empty. And an angel came to them and told them not to fear. And his disciples came together to continue sharing his message of radical love and the kingdom of heaven on earth. And even us here in this Unitarian Universalist church, we are a part of that legacy of the message continuing of radical love. And that is our UU story of Easter. Everybody keep that in mind for a little bit later here. Now you can all return to your seats or come back to the intention table here, where you can symbolize your own continuing radical love to the world. We're making paper heart chains and paper doll chains for you to post up and remind yourself of radical love towards all. Then they sent Jesus to some Pharisees and some Herodians to trap him in what he said. And they came and said to him, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, "Why are you putting me to the test? Bring me a denarius, and let me see it." And they brought one. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this, and whose title?" They answered, "The emperor's." Jesus said to them, "Give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." And they were utterly amazed at him. Sometime during the day on that Friday, the disciple whom Jesus loved most snuck out of the upper room that he and his fellow disciples had been hiding in, doors closed and windows shuttered in the darkness, because he had to see how it was all coming to an end. How had it all gone so wrong? We were just roaming the countryside of our homeland, trying to gather together people to join in a vision of heaven on earth, of the kingdom of God here on earth, where we are equal, where we are each beautiful reflections of our Creator, where we each share a role in building that kingdom. And then we just had to go to Jerusalem. You know, we were fine when we were up in Nazareth. We were out of the earshot of the heart of the empire, and we were pretty safe wandering among our people and proclaiming this vision of the kingdom. But then we came to Jerusalem, and it was hard to come in quietly because they met us at the gate, and they praised and sang songs and made a parade out of it, and it's really hard to keep a low profile when that is happening. And then the rabbi just kept on preaching his message, riling things up with the empire. Everybody's listening, Rabbi. Everybody has their eyes on us. Can we keep a lower profile? Can we just cool it down a little bit? The heat is getting a little high here. And then when Jesus gathered them for the Passover meal, he broke bread with them and said, "Look, guys, I get it. This is hard and this is dangerous. But the kingdom I am proclaiming, the beloved community we are trying to build, that is bigger than any one of us. That is bigger than any emperor. It is certainly bigger than any empire. And because of that, guys, I cannot stop." So when you sit down for this meal again, when you break bread together, remember what I'm telling you right now. This is so much bigger than any of us, and I could not stop. And therefore, you should not either. And then they came for him. They arrested him and tied him up and dragged him away, and then everything here just started falling apart. Judas was the one to betray him, and all of us, and Peter's been walking around town denying he ever knew the rabbi, or any of us for that matter, and we were just falling apart at the seams. And we were marked men, and we needed to go into hiding. But me, I just have to see how it's all coming to an end. So here I am. I have arrived on this hill, and there is the rabbi, nailed up to a cross, dying the same death as thousands of people have under the rule of this empire, the death of criminals and rebels. And the crowds who met us at the gates less than a week ago and were singing praises and giving us a parade, they're just standing around laughing at him now, jeering. Because honestly, how good could his vision have been if this is how it's all winding up, right? Even the rebels being crucified with the rabbi are turning around and laughing at him. The empire's turned him into a joke. And what were we thinking? How could we have followed this vision if this is how it always comes to an end? When people who defy the power of the empire are silenced by that power. When we defy the demands of the empire, the people in power will silence us, and the complacent will always laugh. And isn't it how this story always ends for those who are defiant? What is it the empire demanded at that time? First and foremost, acknowledge that the emperor is a god and worship him as such. Or at the very least, please try not to get in the way of us running the state religion the way we need to keep control of the empire. And that was the delicate balance that the people of Judea found themselves in at that time, trying to worship their own God while staying out of the way of their Roman occupiers. Two opposed religions trying to live in one land. Don't interfere. The emperor is a god. And while we're at it, pay us what we tell you to pay us, because you all owe us money for some reason, and make sure that money is the money that we put out, the one with the God's head on it, that says he's a god right on the coins. Hold those in your hands for a little while, guys. And don't, whatever you do, stand against any of this. Do not defy us. Do not interfere, because we, the empire, the few in power, we claim the power of life and death over you. We have it, and you better believe we will use it. Easter is the culmination of Jesus' story and of his ministry here among us. The ministry of going about and proclaiming the kingdom of heaven on earth. The kingdom of God is here, the beloved community, drawing people in to be a part of it. Equal and beautiful reflections of their Creator, all a part. Jesus' ministry in that form questioned constantly the mechanics of empire, the practice of power as it was wielded at that time. And really, he was questioning that last power that the empire claimed, the power of life and death over everybody. Do we really have that power? Is that within our hands? And if it is it here for us to wield over one another, or should we not be using it together with each other to build something better, to come out on the side of life a little more often? Jesus was executed by the empire, executed by the state for breaking the law. The law he broke was not calling himself the Messiah. There were messiahs everywhere at that time. They were a dime a dozen proclaiming themselves to be the one, and usually the empire just let them bubble up and have their say and do their thing and peter out, because that is what always happened. But Jesus didn't fizzle out the way they would expect. Jesus' crimes were this. To the state of Judea, he was an economic threat, challenging the practice of money changing and lending around the temple, turning the worship of God into an act of commerce, flipping the tables, getting in the way, and threatening the economic security of Judea. And he was a threat as well to the order of the empire, to the way they wielded power, because he interfered with the worship of the emperor God. The reading from Mark is the example of the turning point of just that moment, when he holds the coin with the image of the emperor God. It says, "This is for this guy. Give to God what is God's." And he was pretty clear that the God he was talking about was not the emperor. Jesus challenged the order of the state in front of everybody. And that challenge could not be ignored. And so they executed him. And Jesus' death was the death of thousands within the empire, because that's how the Romans kept order. The cross was a tactic of terror. A colleague of mine says that one way the Greek could be translated was to read crucifixion as lynching, because that is what it was designed to do, to send out a warning to others who would defy, to keep people cowed and in line. See, we do have the power of life and death over you. Look what we just did with it. You like that message he's been talking about, do you? Well, take a look at this, and maybe that will keep you quiet for a little while. This should shut you up. And it did, for a little while. One of the real human miracles of the Easter story is that eventually the disciples emerged from hiding. Eventually, the power of the story they were proclaiming, the idea of the beloved community that they had glimpsed, it was too powerful for them to hold it in anymore. And so they came out to continue the work. And over time, that cross that was a symbol of terror to people became a symbol for them, not to glorify the death of Jesus, because at this point, all of the theological infighting among groups has not happened yet to decide who and what Jesus was and what his death meant and all of that. No, it was simply an adoption of the symbol as an act of defiance, to say to the power of empire, this doesn't frighten us anymore. You cannot control who we are with this anymore, because we have glimpsed something bigger. We have seen hints of the kingdom Jesus proclaimed, and because we've seen that, we know ultimately your power that you claim is an illusion. In the long run, it is not real. And the beloved community is so much bigger than any of us, and bigger than any emperor, and bigger than any empire. And because of that, we cannot stop. The word of the day on Easter is resurrection. In the Koine Greek of the Christian scriptures, the original text, the word used is anastasis, literally to stand again, to rise up, an uprising, defiance. The early church was built on a spirit of defiance. That is part of what we inherit. So why should Unitarian Universalists bother with Easter? The story is unbelievable. Some of us struggle with it. I know I do. But the thing is, the story, repeated over and over again for millennia, doesn't really care if we believe in it or not. Because we exist now as we are as a faith community because of that rising and endless spirit of defiance built into the story. Defiance in the face of the demands of empire, of terrestrial, temporal, human powers. We bother with this story because it reminds us where we came from, what we've inherited, and what the world still needs from us from time to time. Because the answer is yes, we do hold the power of life and death over one another. The decisions we make matter, the words we speak matter. It has an impact. And because we have that power, it must not be abused. Because we have that power, we must treat it as a power used with and among us, more for the balance of life than death, and not wielded over anyone. We are called from time to time to defy the demands of empire, of those mundane temporal powers that say otherwise. Because here's the thing, empire is a human institution, error-prone and fallible. And the people who wield the power within the institution, one of their primary goals is to seek to just preserve that power for themselves. And the process, power tends to lean into some of the worst aspects of human nature. I have to win. And if I have to win, that means somebody has to lose. Somebody has to get the fuzzy end of the lollipop in this equation. Somebody has to be on the outside for me to remain on the inside. Someone is always left outside of the circle that we define as us, so we can concentrate that power. And empire does it through the use of the law. The laws draw the circles that define who's in and who's out. And what are the demands of empire today? What are the demands we hear from people in power around the country today? Worship our God, or at least don't make any noise about not. Don't talk about our mistakes throughout history. We'll tell you what is right. We'll tell you what love is. We'll tell you what gender is. We'll tell you what a woman is. We'll tell you what choices you should make. And while we're at it, why don't you go ahead and turn in your neighbors who aren't making the choices that we have told you to take? Why don't you have a little taste of the power we wield so you won't feel so bad about what we're doing? Oh, and at the same time, remember to fear the foreigners. because they're the real source of all of your trouble, and it has nothing to do with us making laws here. The poet and farmer Wendell Berry ends his poem Manifesto with the phrase, "practice resurrection," which in my younger days I just thought was a cool, funny, clever way to end a poem. But the more and more that I delve into what a resurrection really means, I've come to realize that resurrection really is a practice. It is something we have to attempt day after day, to stand up again when we are knocked down, when others are knocked down, to stand up for other people, to rise again, to defy power takes intention. And in the face of the ongoing demands of empire, the world needs us as resurrectionists, calling ourselves and the beloved community back to that bigger thing, bigger than any of us, bigger than any empire, the kingdom, paradise, the whole human family. Call it what you will. Calling us back to needs that are greater than just what's in my own backyard. It's a dangerous practice. But we gain ground as we defy. Divisions that were prescribed by law, people who were proscribed out of the circle by law, those topple over time because people proclaim something more. They stand up and they stand in defiance. And when we do that, the powerful will try to silence us, and the complacent among us will laugh. But we know now that is not how the story always ends. Because the next Easter comes, and the next, and we tell the story over and over again. And we remember that we have the capacity to rise again too, to stand up again, to practice defiance. Because the world needs us as resurrectionists. May it be so. I'll learn that someday. Just a few minutes of announcements before we depart for this morning. A few things to point out briefly. One, our Easter egg hunt begins after the service today. Parents can bring their kids out to meet together out in the foyer at 11:45, and our guides will help take them outside for our Easter egg hunt today. The women's retreat is back again this year now that we are gathering again together. It's taking place on Saturday, May 7th. It'll be from 9 to 3 that day right here at the church. There's a $20 fee for supplies and for lunch if you would like to join, and that's going to be run by Kelly DeLacy over here and Renae Mitchell back in the booth over there. So you have questions or want to join in on the retreat, talk to them today. The link to register online has been in our announcements and will be in the announcements again this week, so watch for it there. And finally, pledge forms are due in next Sunday, the 24th of April. We would like as many back in as we can because our annual meeting is on the 15th of May and we need time to finalize our budget, knowing what you are planning to give. And think about what you are planning to give. I'd like to introduce right now Rebecca Howard to talk a little bit about why and how she gives. Let me make sure.
Wow, it's wonderful to see everybody here. It's been a long time. So I think the question I was asked is to talk a bit about why I pledged to the church. And trying to answer that question in 2 or 3 minutes feels a little bit to me like what John expresses when he tries to do the entire UU history in 45 minutes. It doesn't seem possible, but we'll give it a go and I'll try to be concise. But I want to give you a little background. I grew up in a Methodist church, and the message I got there was God is love and not so much a punishing type of God. But as many of us do, sometimes as children even, I started to have questions about God, doctrine, dogma, my place in these. Maybe I was about 13 years old, and that line of questioning continued into adulthood. Better? So off and on, I attended a few different Protestant churches. I went to the Newman Center on my university campus, but nothing really fit. So I was unchurched for many years. So about 20 years ago, I experienced a sort of existential crisis. I think my sons were about 19 and 20. So if any of you have had kids around that age, you know that it can be a challenging time. So at that time, we had a newspaper, the Los Alamos Monitor, and they published the names of churches in town each week and a brief blurb of the sermon for that week. I read it for 10 years, and I thought every week, oh, that sounds interesting, but I didn't come. So at the time I finally decided to attend, I really didn't know much about Unitarian Universalism other than what I read in those little blurbs. I didn't even know Universalist was part of the name of the faith. My first Sunday here was, of course, in our old building. It was the start of a church year, and I had decided that if I was going to attend a church, I was going to go to church. So I showed up for the adult RE class, which was held before the service, where I didn't know anybody. And as a newcomer, this seemed a little unusual, but I felt welcome. And not only welcome, but delightedly so. The class was to be a discussion of a book of essays by Barbara Kingsolver, who was an author I already loved. I don't really see myself as an adversarial person, but during this, as time went on, I would express alternate viewpoints of the essays than what the group was discussing. And not only was I not dissed, but these people seemed to actually like hearing alternative viewpoints. So I was hooked. So to learn more about this somewhat puzzling church, I attended a membership class and joined the church in the spring of 2003, I think. Then I thought, well, I didn't grow up in this tradition. Maybe I should teach RE, which I did, and I've done off and on since then. I took a number of baby steps to get involved. I served on a committee or two. I attended a couple of small group ministry groups, although they weren't called that at the time. Served on the board, went to leadership school, did OWL facilitator training. All this time, I was learning not only about Unitarian Universalism, but I was learning about myself and my passions, and I was also learning some leadership skills. So I have to admit, at times, I find being a UU a lot of work. Not only are we allowed, but we are encouraged to figure out for ourselves what gives life truth and meaning. The answers we're seeking are not given to us. We're allowed to go deep into our souls or wherever we go to seek and maybe discover beliefs and answers. So soul searching, or journeying, however we go about it, isn't particularly easy for me. But the gifts I've found here are many, and some can't be named. A sense of community and caring and acceptance can be hard to find. And I want to keep the doors of this church open for anyone who, like me, was seeking principles that I could live by and with. I feel this church offers a safe space with an open atmosphere in which to ask questions, which I never found in a church anyway. I understand that asking questions and seeking our own answers might not be for everyone, but for those of us who need to ask and love and care for what this church offers, I want to help make it available. When we pass the basket for our offering, we frequently say, "May what you give bring you joy." And I pledge in such a way that it's a joy. And it sometimes feels like a stretch, but if the comfort and kindness and challenge to grow, even at my age, and joy and wonder that I find here can be shared with even one other person who is looking for it, I'm willing to stretch a bit. So those are some of the reasons I pledge financial support to keep our church doors open. I'll end there, but if anybody wants to talk to me about how I came to make decisions and those things, I'll be around after the service. So, thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca. And now, as we prepare to return to our everyday lives, it is time to give something of the gifts of this community back to the larger community which we are part of. It is time for our offering. During the month of April, all cash and undesignated funds that we collect will be given to the Pacific Western region of the Unitarian Universalist Association in support of their youth summer camps for middle schoolers and high schoolers. You can give through the basket this morning. We are passing that around again. We have a donation box at the back of the room as well. And you can, as always, use your Givelify app on your mobile device to make your gift for the week or for the month, and you can choose where your donation goes in that app. The offering will now be accepted. May what you give bring you joy and into deeper relationship with this community. Friends, may life bless us and keep us. May the light of life shine upon us and out from within us and be gracious to us and bring us peace. For this is the day. This is the one wild and precious life we have been given. So let us all find a way to rejoice and be glad in it. Go in peace.